Hi everyone, and welcome to this video on writing a thematic essay. Now this video is aimed at Year 11 ESL students and is relevant to their area of study. So, in approaching your essay for an area of study, you really need to have in your mind exactly what the Board of Studies is asking from you. As a result, there are a couple of things that you really need to know. And these things are what we're going to be addressing in detail today. The first is what a thematic essay is. So we're going to be looking at exactly what that essay is, what it's asking of you, and what you need to include in it. Secondly, you need to know how to structure a thematic essay. So today we're going to be looking at a number of different structures which you could potentially use, and also examining which of these structures tends to be the most successful for ESL students. The third element is how the text type can vary in the essay section. So what I mean by this is that the essay doesn't always ask just for an essay form, it could ask for a different text type. And we'll be looking at what these text types are and how you write them later in the video. So let's begin by asking ourselves, what is a thematic essay? Well, a thematic essay is the essay which surrounds the theme of your area of study. So it's basically the culmination of your work for the entire term. The essay counts for 20 out of 45 marks in paper 1 of your exam. So what that really means is that it's 20 marks towards your essay and then 25 for your comprehension. So you do want to be spending a little less time on your essay in your final exam. However, that doesn't mean that you don't need to prepare for it. The essay needs a lot of preparation, analysis, and planning, and we're going to be looking at that. Basically, your essay is your expression of your area of study theme. So it's everything you think about that theme, your thesis, and then the ideas which you can develop from that theme. As well as that, it's looking at both your two set texts as well as your related text. So it's really asking you to draw in a lot of knowledge from a whole lot of areas and then apply that just to one succinct and excellent essay. So, a thematic essay is an essay which argues a theme. And not only a theme, but your particular opinion on the theme and the way in which you think the theme is most obviously expressed in your texts. So, your theme is the main focus of your essay. Your entire essay has to be coming back to that theme over and over again. Each paragraph will be covering a different part of your theme. So what this means is that you're not writing an entire essay just on, for example, change, but you're looking at different elements of change, how change can be happening in different ways, and then using each of these different ways as an example of a paragraph for your essay. So each paragraph is really going to be covering a different idea, giving a bit of variety to your essay, and making it more interesting for the marker to read. This will be introduced by a topic sentence and then expanded by quotes, examples, techniques, and analysis. And this is all things which you can draw from what you do in class with your teacher and then what you do on your own when you're analysing your related text. So, let's look at this guide to writing a thematic essay. It's really important that you get structure in your mind and well practiced in order to be able to produce an excellent essay. Now, in previous videos, we've looked at things like context and literature. Now, all of these things are obviously really important. You have to get the content mastered, but exactly the same, you also need to get structure mastered. So you really have to juggle getting structure and style, as well as your content and your understanding of your text. So, let's look at some structure. Firstly, we're beginning with our introduction. Now, obviously, this is where you orient your reader to your argument and you introduce your texts. So this is where you list your texts and the years in which they were composed and by who. You're then looking at the body of your text. So the first section is going to be on your first set text. Remember, in ESL, you're studying 2 set texts and 1 related text for this area of study. So you want to be splitting your essay roughly into thirds, with your set text as the first element of the body, then the second set text as the second element of the body, and then your related text as your third element of the body. So within this, you could perhaps do about 2 paragraphs per text, and if you find you can write more, write as much as you can. You then want to wrap up your essay with a conclusion where you're really summarizing your argument, linking together all your ideas, and concluding with an explanation of how your texts link to your area of study. So let's go through each element of this structure and really dissect how you can write the best possible essay. So, we look at the introduction. In the introduction, you really want to be including the key words from the question. This really makes sure that the marker knows that yes, you're answering the question and not just writing down any essay which you've memorized at home. You're then making sure you use your thesis idea. So as we discussed in our introduction video, you can use dictionaries and encyclopedias to develop your idea of what your theme means. And this is your thesis, and this thesis is what you really need to be including in your introduction. You then need to be using references to the syllabus rubric, which we went through in the introduction video, to make sure that the marker knows that you understand what an area of study is and how you answer the questions to do with that rubric. You then want to be naming all of the texts and also giving their published date, genre, theme, and context. Now, this is a really important step, and you need to make sure all of these 3 things are memorized. So make sure before you go into exam that you've memorized the titles, composers, and the published dates of your texts. This is going to make sure that your information is accurate and interesting for the marker. You then need, in your introduction, to give a signpost of your basic argument that you are going to make. So basically what we mean by this is listing about your 3 or 4 main points, which are going to make up the basis for your paragraphs. So for example, you might want to give a quick indication of the way that each of the different texts you'll be looking at relate back to whatever theme you're studying. Paragraph structure-wise, remember that how many paragraphs you do is entirely based on how fast you write. So before you go into an exam, do a couple of practice papers and really make sure you have an understanding of how you pace yourself in exams and how much you expect yourself to be writing. So we're looking at a topic sentence with a link at the opening of each paragraph, really to introduce the reader to the basic idea which that paragraph will hold. You're then looking at stating the language technique, or indeed, if it's a visual text, stating a visual technique. This really shows the marker that you have specific knowledge of that text. You're not just being broad and fluffy, but you've really done your homework, you've done your research, and you have examples to show off. You then want to support that with a quote. Now, quotes are things that you really, although it's difficult, need to memorize from the text. A good idea maybe is making some flashcards with quotes on the back that you can carry around and just look at whenever you have a spare moment. This will ensure that you always have some quotes which you can put into your essay. You then need to explain the effect of that quote and technique on the theme. As we've discussed, you're always coming back to that theme, and while you might be bored out of your mind with how often you mention that theme, it's what the marker wants to read. So if you're always coming back to that, you're definitely going to be successful. You then introduce a concluding sentence, which basically, as always, gives a link back to the question and provides a direct answer to what the question's asking you. Once we get to the conclusion, you'll see that there's a definite tone of finality. You can use words such as ultimately and finally to make sure that the marker knows that yes, you're really finishing off your essay now and that you're finally wrapping it up. You can therefore link back to the rubric and the question, and also make sure you explain your main points so that all of your ideas in your essay are clearly laid out towards the end. You really want to make sure that the marker has a good understanding of everything you've tried to prove, and just giving them a brief conclusion is a really good way to make sure that none of your ideas will be lost. You also want to end on an explanation of your theme and perhaps a meaningful comment. So instead of just stating what your theme is, really showing what you think about your theme and really showing the way in which you've learned something from these texts about your theme and communicating that to the marker. We now get to this section on essay style. Now, as we've discussed in ESL, what you're looking at is a language study within an area of study. So one of your key focuses, as we dissected from the rubric earlier on, is improving the way in which you use your language in a sophisticated and interesting way. So let's look at a few elements of language and how you can master these. The first is whether you should use first or third person. Obviously in everyday life you're using first person. You're saying, I'm going to go to the shops, I'm going to sit down now. However, in your essays that's a big no. What you really want to be using is the third person. So instead of I and me, you're looking at things like the reader can see that, the viewer can see that, or one can see that. This is a really sophisticated language technique which you need to use. It's also therefore best to use third person to demonstrate that you have an understanding of the formal essay style. First person, however, you can use if it's asking for a personal response question. If the essay is asking for your particular view on the subject, yeah, you can put some I's in there to make sure that the marker knows this is your opinion. Maybe if it's something like a diary entry or a journal, you definitely want to be including I's and me's to make sure that the marker knows you understand that form. We then get to the concept of grammar. Now, in your study of English, obviously you know that it's really important to be accurate in your grammar, as it really just sets you above the rest and makes sure that the marker knows that you do have a good understanding of English and that you can communicate that through your writing. So you want to choose between past or present tense and then maintain this throughout. For example, you want to be saying Shakespeare uses or Shakespeare used, and then sticking with that throughout the entire essay. I would personally recommend that you use the present tense. It's just a more sophisticated technique and gives an indication that you really know that the work is ongoing, even though the author might not be alive anymore. We then get to the concept of sentences. So it's really important that you use some short and some long sentences. So this variation in sizes and length is really important in creating a sophisticated style. This means that you're going to be focusing on language and expression. And by having short, manageable sentences, you really want to make sure that your expression's clear, logical, and that the marker can understand every single word which you write down on the page. This means that you can use dashes, colons, and semicolons to break up the sentences. And if you don't understand how to use these grammatical techniques, it's a good idea to look these up online so that you have a basic mastery of how you can use these to improve your writing. So, what's the best way to answer the question? Something which I've been saying over and over again is that it's really important that you make sure you don't only write a good essay, but an essay which answers the question and gives the marker what they want to read. Obviously, you need to have specific examples from your text and use this in structure to show in a sophisticated way that you really know the answer and show this off to the marker. So for example, in the introduction, you're stating your answer and argument, you're listing your texts, explaining your texts, using these as a stepping stone to communicating your area of study theme. Remember, your essay isn't actually about your texts, it's actually about your theme, and you're just using your texts to prove that theme. You then want to list your ideas, as we've discussed. We then move on to the body. It's really interesting to think of the body of your essay as a bit like a backbone. So each paragraph is just like the little elements which make up the overall structure. So if you think about it like that, you want to make sure each of your paragraphs is quite similar in its length and style. So you want to be doing about a theme per paragraph and ensuring that you're strict and repetitive in the style and format that you use. You also want to be using 1 to 4 quotes per paragraph and making sure these are memorized and accurate. Using techniques is obviously extremely vital, and this is something we've discussed and will continue to look at when we examine your text specifically. In the conclusion, obviously, you need to summarize the whole point of your essay and make sure that the marker knows that you really understand that you're answering the question. You then need to go over your argument just by giving a brief outline of everything which you've said in that essay, as well as demonstrating the way in which perhaps your theme varies across the text and has changed over time. The final point is that you need to provide your personal response on the issue, and this is by developing your thesis idea, really practicing that and getting it up to a high standard, which you continually pull out for all of your essays. So, that brings us to the end of our lesson today on writing a thematic essay. Now you understand the basic structures and format which you need to use. You can utilize this in writing practice essays based on your own texts. Once you've dissected your texts, come up with examples of techniques, themes, and quotes. Use it in this essay format to ensure that you have a successful essay for your ESL area of study.